Hey guys, welcome back to Brittany Lee the Bio Geek. My name is Brittany Foray, and today I'm going to be going over the parts of the cell. So what I have here is I have a model, a 3D model of a cell. I'm going to go over what the different parts and organelles are in the cell. Then I'll talk a little bit about what each organelle does and how it contributes to the overall physiological function of the cell. So just to give you guys a little bit of an introduction, the human body has about 32 trillion cells. Some of them are different from each other, but some of them have very similar functions. So a group of cells that has the same function, that coalesces, would form a tissue. The tissues could come together to form organs, such as the heart, the lungs, the stomach. Those organs would come together to form organ systems, like the integumentary system, the muscular system, the skeletal system, the nervous system. And then those organ systems come together to form the human body. So the first organelle I want to talk about is the cell membrane. The cell membrane is, or also called the plasma membrane, is a double lipid bilayer that separates the inside of the cell from the outside environment. So the cell membrane is made up of a double phospholipid bilayer. It is also selectively permeable, meaning that it only lets certain substances into the cell and only lets certain substances outside of the cell. And which substances it allows in and out really depends on if there's ion channels or aquaporins that'll allow those substances to cross. Now in my next video, I'll talk about cellular transport and how substances in water are allowed to cross the membrane through processes such as diffusion, active transport, and osmosis. So stay tuned for my next video and you'll hear more about those cellular processes. So the plasma membrane is going to be really important in separating these contents and keeping them inside from the rest of the contents that are outside. So then moving further inside of the cell, we're going to see all of this jelly-like substance immersed in all of the organelles. So the organelles are the fundamental units within the cell that each have their own role or biological process. So the jelly-like substance that surrounds those organelles is called the cytosol. It's just this fluid matrix that suspends all the organelles and really nestles them nicely. If you talk about all of the contents of the cell, including the cytosol and the organelles, that term is called the cytoplasm. So the cytoplasm will contain everything within that plasma membrane. So then moving on, we'll talk about the giant spherical organelle in the center of the cell, and this is called the nucleus. The nucleus contains a few different layers. It has the nuclear membrane, which is going to keep the contents from the inside of the nucleus separated from the contents from the rest of the cell. Then the nucleus contains all of the chromosomes. So the chromosomes are structures that contain all of the DNA in the cell. And if you've taken any biology before, you know that the DNA contains all of the code to make every single protein that cell possibly needs. So all of the machinery that can do cellular respiration, that can break down other enzymes and proteins, making new substances, the cellular machinery that carries those processes out are the proteins. And proteins are all made from the code that is the DNA, and that's located within the nucleus. The last organelle I want to talk about within the nucleus is going to be the nucleolus. The nucleolus has a special role. It's going to synthesize the ribosomal RNA and help assemble ribosomes. And I'll tell you a little bit about the ribosomes very shortly. So that's the nucleus. Now, when you move slightly outside the nucleus, you'll start to see this endomembrane system. So it's going to consist of the rough endoplasmic reticulum and the smooth endoplasmic reticulum. So the endoplasmic reticulum contains these stacks called cisternae, and you'll see it's this little network that kind of surrounds all of the nucleus. What happens here is protein synthesis. So the little blue dots that you see here on the rough endoplasmic reticulum, these are ribosomes. Ribosomes are the fundamental organelle that's going to synthesize proteins from the messenger RNA. So the process of protein synthesis begins in the nucleus, where the DNA is transcribed into RNA. So remember that nuclear membrane keeps certain substances in. It actually keeps all of the DNA inside of that nucleus, so DNA does not leave the nucleus. So the DNA gets transcribed into a messenger RNA. That messenger RNA, or mRNA, can then leave the nucleus, get read by ribosomes, which will then translate that messenger RNA into a fully functioning protein. So ribosomes are very important. Now, the endoplasmic reticulum with the ribosomes will make those proteins process them and package them into little vesicles that will transport them to other parts of the cell where their final destination is. Now, as you move farther away from the nucleus, excuse me, as you move farther away from the nucleus, you'll see a substance that looks similar to the rough endoplasmic reticulum, except for it lacks those blue dots, those ribosomes. So this is going to be the smooth endoplasmic reticulum right here. The smooth endoplasmic reticulum does not contain ribosomes. It's smooth, and what it's going to do is it's going to synthesize lipids. Now, when I think about the smooth endoplasmic reticulum and what it does, I like to think about the fact that lipids and fats are pretty smooth. So the smooth endoplasmic reticulum is going to synthesize lipids, such as cholesterol and the phospholipids that make up that cell membrane. Next, we're going to move further away from the nucleus, and we're going to see this blue organelle here that looks slightly similar to the endoplasmic reticulum, but it's a little bit farther away. This is called the Golgi Apparatus. The Golgi Apparatus is really important for post-translational processing and packaging different proteins and substances for targets in other regions of the cell. The Golgi Apparatus is also where the lysosomal vesicles come from. So you'll see these little vesicles that are budding off or pulling off the side of the Golgi Apparatus. These are your lysosomal vesicles. The lysosomal vesicles contain lytic enzymes that are going to help break down cellular debris. So they're going to be like the garbage disposals of the cell. They help take up trash, break it down in a way that it's not going to cause toxicity and damage the rest of the inside of that cell. Now, you might notice that there are these other circular organelles that are also located within the cell that look sort of like these lysosomal vesicles. These, however, are called peroxisomes. The peroxisomes are very similar to the lysosomes. However, they don't contain these lytic enzymes. They contain hydrogen peroxide. The peroxisomes, with hydrogen peroxide, very nicely named, are going to be able to help neutralize toxins within the cell. Now, in order to tell them apart on a cellular model, the lysosomes will be associated with the Golgi apparatus, whereas the peroxisomes will just be will not be associated with the Golgi. They'll be freestanding within the rest of the cell. Next, I want to move on to an organelle that everyone is probably really familiar with, and it's the mitochondria. The mitochondria is a double membrane organelle, so it contains an outer membrane and then an inner membrane, which you can see the little lines in the middle of the mitochondria. This is where the inner membrane folds to form what's called cristae, okay? So the mitochondria, you may know, is the powerhouse of the cell. But in scientific terms, what does that actually mean? The powerhouse of the cell means that it creates all of the energy, or most of the energy, that that cell is going to need to carry out all of its biological processes. Now, the cell uses energy in the form of ATP, or adenosine triphosphate. Okay, this is the energy currency of the cell. All of that is going to be made mostly in the mitochondria. You have a little bit made outside the cell, and when I do a video on the TCA cycle and glycolysis, I'll talk more about how ATP can be made outside of the mitochondria. But the mitochondria is going to be, for the most part, making most of the ATP that the cell needs to perform all of its biological functions. Next, I want to talk about the centrioles. The centrioles are a pair of organelles that are super important during mitosis. So mitosis is the process by which a cell divides, goes from making one cell into two daughter cells. So the centrioles are going to help organize the chromosomes so that they can be pulled into the appropriate sides, and it's going to help organize the rest of the cell so that the organelles are divided in a logical way that allows two daughter offspring cells to be fully functioning and contain all of the machines and all of the organelles it needs to survive. Now, the last organelle I want to talk about that you can't really see on this model because it's not here is going to be the cytoskeleton. So just as humans have an actual skeleton, like you see over there, the cell has its own skeleton called the cytoskeleton, or cyto meaning cell, the cell skeleton. The cytoskeleton provides the architecture needed to keep the cell in the shape that it needs to be. In some cells that migrate, the cytoskeleton will also reassemble itself to help guide movement of that cell. The cytoskeleton also provides essentially a highway system so that organelles and different proteins and substances, vesicles, it gives them a highway system so that these substances and these vesicles can actually be transported along the cytoskeleton. The cytoskeleton is made up of three major groups of proteins. You have the microtubules, which are the largest. You have the intermediate filaments, which are the middle, are intermediately sized. And then you have the microfilaments, which are made of actin, and those are the smallest of the three. So the cytoskeleton is really important in maintaining the cell shape, giving it its rigidity, not rigidity, but giving it some integrity, and allowing for substances to be transported along that highway system. So now I'm going to go ahead and I'm going to label these organelles, and I want you to see if you can go back and identify them on your own and talk a little bit about on your own what each of them do so that you can study and prepare for your own exam. So with that, that's the parts of the cell. I hope you found this video useful, and stay tuned for my next video where I'm going to be going over transport across the cell membrane. I'm going to be covering active transports such as the sodium-potassium ATPase, osmosis, the transport of water across the cellular membrane, and then diffusion, which is a passive movement of substances across this membrane. So stay tuned for that. So thank you for stopping by. Once again, I'm Brittany Lee, the Science Geek. Don't forget to like and subscribe if you haven't already, and request content if there's anything you want me to cover. Bye guys!